According to the Russian state media, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is visiting Pyongyang this weekend for a new round of strategic talks. This comes as North Korea prepares to send an additional 25,000 to 30,000 soldiers to aid Russia's expanded offensive. Satellite images show troop movements and supply flights between the two states, while reports suggest North Korean troops are already fighting alongside Russian forces. According to Western officials, thousands have been killed or wounded so far. Lavrov is expected to meet his North Korean counterpart and possibly Kim Jong-un, signaling a military alliance that could reshape security in Europe and Asia. This comes as Lavrov says he outlines Putin's position on settling the Ukraine war in a meeting with top U.S. diplomat Marco Rubio on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Malaysia. Let's listen in to what the Russian foreign minister had to say in the summit.
Я хочу ответить словами Дональда Трампа. Так я вам и скажу. И ждите больших сюрпризов, он сказал. Ну, я не знаю насчет больших сюрпризов, но сами понимаете, если вы же знакомы с дипломатической деятельностью, вы нас часто сопровождаете. Есть вещи, которые не комментируются. Да, мы обсуждали Украину, мы подтвердили ту позицию, которую президент Путин излагал, и в том числе в очередной раз 3 июля в разговоре с президентом Трампом.
Now we are joined by Andrew K.P. Long. He's a China strategist joining us live from London. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. Good to see you. How credible are the reports of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian forces, and what could this mean for the dynamics of the conflict in Ukraine, according to you?
Well, there are many reports, together with films and photographs of showing North Korean soldiers fighting alongside the Russians over Ukraine. This reflects a strategic shift of the North Koreans towards forming a closer alliance with Russia against American aggression. Because trace back a little of how the United States wants to suppress North Korea's sovereignty and internal security. Think about Trump 1.0. When President Trump stepped over the border into North Korea and shook hands with Kim, it's all for show, because that was culminated after a series of talks, the so-called six-party talks, which even preceded President Trump's first presidency, with the so-called six parties, including a number of European countries and also China, and brokering a deal. But then the United States strategy is always wants the North Korea to surrender everything first before they even consider granting some of the concessions, for example, easing the economic sanctions, strangleholding North Korea's economy. So the North Koreans say, well, this is not the way to negotiate. How can I surrender everything? And then, begging for mercy, that kind of crumbs from the table. So that seeking an insurance, a nuclear insurance first of all, developing their own nuclear weapons. And then they took this leave from China's Chairman Mao's book. Trace back the time when Chairman Mao first founded the People's Republic of China, when China was extremely poor. After years of war and internal conflict, and China eventually stood up with a very, very poor country. At that time, China broke off relations with Russia. Russia, because there was a conflict of views on how the communist movement should be advanced around the world, and that both leaders did not agree eventually, and Russia withdrew all the technical experts from China and even threatened China with nuclear weapons at that time. So the choice for Chairman Mao was between developing its economy and developing its nuclear weapons. In terms of China's terminology, it's a choice between 和止 means nuclear power, 裤子 means trousers, because China was so poor that several families had to share a pair of trousers. So Chairman Mao chose the bomb instead of developing the economy first of all. So eventually, China stood up and with its own nuclear bomb and maintained its own security. The North Koreans is trying to take a leaf out of China's Chairman Mao's book. And then, of course, that was not enough because nowadays it's not just whether we have one or two bombs, because the Americans can send in the bombers and obliterate everything as they try to do in Iran. So the North Koreans are trying to develop its long-range missiles with nuclear-capable warheads, and it's also allying with Russia now. So in return for Russian technology, missile technology to develop its long-range weapons, the North Koreans are sending soldiers over to fight alongside Russia. And of course, for Russia, the Ukraine campaign is extremely important because President Putin had put a lot of his political capital on the campaign. And now, because the Trump's recalibrating its strategy and trying to extract itself from Ukraine, even trying to negotiate a peace behind the back of European allies. So Putin saw this, but another latest development is that Europeans, they are fearful of the very resurgent Russia, and they are more united in supplying weapons to Ukraine. So the Ukraine war is carrying on, and Russia is running out of soldiers. And of course, the Ukrainians are running out of soldiers even more. And hence, the help from North Korean soldiers fighting alongside Russia became important and strategic, considering all the complex dynamics I've outlined.
And Andrew, now looking at bigger picture, what does the implication or what does this timing suggest about Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visiting Pyongyang amid ongoing talks about ongoing also the drills that took place yesterday in Taiwan and then today in between South Korea, Japan, and U.S.?
Yes, you highlighted the hot points. First of all, the timing is important in the sense that it came after the bombing by United States of the Ukrainian nuclear facilities, sending the bombers all the way from the United States, stealth bombers, kind of bunker-busted bombers with dubious results. But then it also exposed the kind of security risk in terms of how you're going to withstand this kind of bombardment, long-distance bombardment. And air defenses is very important. And air defenses depend on modern missile technology, communication systems. So Russia is much more better placed to supply the North Koreans with air defenses. The second dimension is, of course, the forming a closer military alliance between South Korea and Japan. There is a China perspective as part of the China containment strategy in Asia Pacific, including the Quad with India and also Australia, the nuclear power submarines, and also the first island chain centered in Okinawa, second island chain centered in Guam, and forming a closer military cooperation between Japan and South Korea, and even deploying anti-aircraft missiles or anti-air missiles in South Korea, the so-called THAAD missiles. But for North Korea, if the U.S. hostile forces gains dominance in that area, that would threaten the security of North Korea, because the alliance with anti-Western forces, including China, is important. And hence, the visit of the Lavrovs could supply not only the air defenses, but also how to strengthen the cooperation with the Russians in the Asia-Pacific area. That is also a response to so-called bringing the NATO influence to the Asia-Pacific. So if NATO forces are brought into the Pacific, the counterbalance would be to bring the Russian influence, military influence, into the Asia-Pacific to counter this kind of coercion with a Western-led, American-led NATO forces or with Americans allies with Japan and Australia in the Asia-Pacific. And that would, of course, affect the security of North Korea.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on the topic. 9 people have been injured in Kharkiv